to explore this topic that I am so inspired and passionate about. So thank you so much for joining me. Before I dig into this topic, I want to say another thank you to our sponsors, the Augustine Educational Foundation and Sacred Hearts Academy. Thank you for putting on this wonderful free resource and free event for everyone. So I want to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about my background and why I'm interested and where I approach this topic of inspiring young girls in STEM and with technology. So my name is Amanda, and I'm an ed tech consultant, and under that umbrella, I do all sorts of things such as creating new technologies for young children, writing books. My most recent book is Breaking the STEM Stereotype, Reaching Girls in Early Childhood, and I'll be sharing some of the themes and principles and ideas from that book with you today. Creating curriculum, pedagogies, and interventions. I do hold 2 remote appointments. I'm a lecturer in the Tufts Early Childhood Technology Graduate Certificate Program. I'll tell you a little bit more about that program later on in this presentation in case any of you are interested in continuing your learning in a virtual setting. It's a wonderful program that you might be interested in. And I'm also associate faculty in the University of Phoenix College of Doctoral Studies EdTech program as well. And I'm a mom, and I do have a young daughter and a son. And this idea of engaging girls in STEM is really a personal one based on my own experiences as a child, as well as things I've encountered throughout my career and the research that I've done. So I'm really excited and happy that you're all here with me today to talk about this really important and critical topic. So feel free to chat. Caitlin will be moderating the chat a little bit, and at the end of this presentation, we'll save some time for Q&A, but feel free to introduce yourselves to one another, what your role is in education, what grades you teach, if you're a teacher or a parent, and maybe what brought you to this particular workshop, why this is a topic that is of interest to you. So here's the scope of what we'll try to squeeze into this tight 45-minute presentation. And I will share my email and my website and everything at the end of this talk in case you want to communicate and collaborate and talk about these issues further once this presentation is over. Before we get into early childhood and early elementary school, we're going to look at the big picture of women in tech and why this matters. What is women's representation in STEM and tech right now, and how that impacts all of us every day, regardless of our gender identity. Then we will be looking specifically at these early childhood years, pre-K through 2nd grade, around those years, to talk about why this is a critical time to begin reaching girls and all children. I'll share a little bit about the activities, technology, curricular approaches that you can take to reach girls successfully in these early years. And I'll leave you with tips and resources so that you can go forward and put some things into practice into your own homes or educational settings. And then we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. So if that sounds like a good plan, let's go ahead and get started. So women currently make up about half of the US workforce, but only around 13% of engineers are women, and only around 26% of computer scientists are women. So obviously this is a big divide, and it's not one that is gradually getting better over the years. This has been an issue for decades. Researchers, social scientists, educators have been trying to figure out why there has been this persistent underrepresentation of women in these technical STEM fields. And not only are women missing out on potentially lucrative or stimulating and rewarding careers, there's also this bleed out effect. When women's voices aren't heard in the fields that drive innovation in our country, we see this impacting the tech tools that we all rely on every day. So some of the things that you might have heard about in the media over the years, we've seen cell phones that don't fit women's hands as well as men's, digital assistant devices that can't answer women's questions as well as men's, and even health apps that claim to be tracking everything, but don't track things like women's menstrual cycles. So when diverse voices aren't heard in the fields that create the tools that we rely on every day, we see this impacting the actual design and the uses of these tools. And I'm focusing in this talk on representation of women's voices in these fields, but it is important to point out that women are not the only groups that are underrepresented in these technical STEM fields. And it's important that we all work towards diversity in every sense of the word in these fields that create the materials and the tech and the apps that we all rely on and we all use every day. So that's clearly a problem. That's clearly something that we need to work on addressing. But you might still be wondering, what the heck does early childhood, preschoolers, and kindergartners have to do with it? Well, this issue of women's underrepresentation in STEM has been explored from many different angles. And one piece, and the piece that I focus on in my own work, is the impact of stereotypes and stereotype threat. And in order to reduce the stereotypes or the impact of these negative cultural stereotypes about women's abilities in STEM, there have been a lot of wonderful interventions that have taken place at the middle school and high school and college level to reach young women in their kind of peak career decision years with coding and engineering support, mentorship, and programs. But for a lot of girls, this is happening too late because basic stereotypes begin to develop in young children around ages 2 or 3. And I do have a 3-year-old at home, and I can really see this playing out before my eyes in a home setting as well, just in the things that he says and the beliefs that he's starting to form about the world around him. By around age 5, so when kids are typically entering kindergarten, we see that children have developed a range of stereotypes and beliefs about gender, their own interests, and their own abilities. In my own research specific to gender and technologies that I've worked with the Developmental Technologies or DevTech research group on over the past decade, I've seen that young children do have a range of gender stereotypes about many different STEM tools, apps, and games that are out there. A masculine stereotype that they feel that more boys would enjoy these tools or apps than girls. And I've seen in some of my early research, when using curriculum or tools that were not specifically designed to be inclusive and engaging to all children, that boys would significantly outperform girls on certain programming and coding tasks beginning at the kindergarten level. And in my most recent research, a 3-year longitudinal study on the female experience on competitive VEX robotics competition teams for middle and high school students, I found that the females participating on these teams tend to have significantly less confidence than their male counterparts. And when digging a little bit deeper there, what we found by report of the students as well as the team mentors is that these female students, even at this highest level competitive high school robotics teams, are entering with less experience with things like Legos and building and engineering during their elementary and early childhood years. And I thought this was such a salient finding as someone who typically works at the early childhood level. And I was doing this research project with middle and high school participants from across the country, that it still pointed back to this fact that early childhood matters and that we need to start early if we're going to address these stereotypes and ideally prevent these stereotypes from being ingrained in kids to begin with. A lot of this research that I've just shared is a little bit scary and negative, and I realize that. So I do want to, as I'm moving on from the research into practice and what we can do about it, I do want to share some uplifting findings, which is that I have seen that through collaborative, creative, hands-on robotics and engineering and coding initiatives, we can significantly increase girls' interest in engineering during those foundational K through 2nd grade years, and that we can reduce the types of gender stereotypes and beliefs that kids of all gender identities have and hold about these technologies. So really, when we're being thoughtful and we're being purposeful about the tools we use and the programs and the curriculum that we're designing, we really can make such a positive impact on young children's lives and their beliefs about themselves and their abilities. So all that is a long way of saying I'm so glad that you're all here and that you care about reaching girls and all children during these pivotal early childhood years where we don't always focus so much on STEM and technology initiatives. So I have been saying STEM, and that is the acronym that we're all pretty familiar with. But I actually think that one way that we can reach more people with technology and science and engineering is by using this framework of STEAM and integrating the arts with STEM. And so STEAM really just means integrating skills, concepts, and practices across all of these domains: science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. At the early childhood level, what this often looks like is integrating some sort of arts and crafts component with your robot or your digital project. And that is a great way to start getting kids interested and integrating the arts with STEM. But it's really a limited mindset on what STEAM means and the whole potential of STEAM. This A of arts and STEAM can mean the whole spectrum of the liberal arts. So music, dance, culture, drama, literature, integrating all of these different fields with STEM really allows you to reach more people. And so here's where I give my caveat that I am a former drama teacher, my previous career life before going into this more technology focus. So I really do believe, honestly, that the arts as well as technology and STEM are both ways that we can build kids' confidence, real world skills, and their belief in their abilities in really different ways. And these domains reach really different types of kids, right? So by integrating music, puppetry, dance, or drama with our STEM initiatives, we can start reaching more kids than the typical kids who already have confidence and think of themselves as a STEM kid, or that they love robots or they love coding. We want to reach those kids, but we want to reach a wider range of kids as well. If we're really going to be bridging this divide and getting more voices heard in STEM, we need to start reaching different kinds of kids as well. And I think by introducing the arts and music as our lens, we can really get more people interested. And I've even found in the clubs or programs that I've run, just by kind of tweaking the title and the flyer of how I would advertise something, from a STEM Saturday club to an arts focused club, I can reach different kids and different types of kids sign up. So it's really, I think it's something I've thought about more over the years. And I think that this STEAM framework can really be a powerful one for reaching more kids. So all that being said, how do we choose the actual technology and STEM tools and STEM materials that we want to engage girls, and not just girls, but all children? So of course, this talk is focusing on reaching girls, but all of the tips, technologies, tools, books that I will share with you today are great for you to use with all kids, regardless of their gender identity. So before we get into some of the modern day tools that we have to choose from, we can take a little walk down memory lane to see how far we've come or haven't come in terms of the STEM and engineering offerings and how they are presented to young children. So on the left, we see this ad from 1922 that is directly tailored to boys for these erector building sets. The tagline is "Boys today, men tomorrow." And then on the other side of the screen from 2015, so not that long ago, we see this picture from a Target that actually went viral. Some of you might have seen this on social media, where this is how they organized their building sets aisle. So they organized it by building sets and then girls' building sets. So at first, you might not think there's anything wrong with that picture or that categorization, but it really speaks to this inherent belief and stereotype that, well, building sets, Legos, engineering, that's obviously for boys, so we don't need to call out anything about that. If girls want to do this, we need these special girls building sets. So it's this idea that, because we don't see boys building sets and then girls building sets. It's just this idea that if girls are going to try to do building, we have this separate aisle for them. So there's a lot wrong with that picture and that mindset that people have, that in general, these sets are for, these tools are going to interest boys more than girls. And honestly, this was true from a marketing and a a sales perspective, for a really long time, Lego and other kits were not selling well to a female audience. And although there has been some shifts between 2015 and today, we still see aisles that look like this. You know, they might not say girls building sets, or girls building sets and boys building sets, but we do still see the stark divide between the pink aisle and the blue aisle. And we see it's not just color, right? It's thematic. If you look closer at some of these boxes, the girls' kits might focus more on social emotional or helping or animals, whereas the boys' kits are more action, and sometimes it's like destruction or construction. And so really, whether we're calling it out or not, there really is still this big divide on how engineering and STEM products are marketed to young children and their parents. There have been, over the last half decade or more, some wonderful companies and products that are trying to disrupt this pink aisle, and playing with this idea that we can have products that are story driven and social emotional driven, and that have beautiful colors or stereotypically female colors and themes, but are still teaching engineering concepts and are really engaging kids in quality hands-on building, and that they can be used by boys, girls, kids of any gender. And so there have been some, Goldie Blocks is one that you might have heard of. They link everything to this story and this character of Goldie. Ruminate are these boxes that allow you to make wired doll houses that include motors and fans and lights and things like that. And so we're seeing this new crop of pink tech, of tech that is trying to play off of this image and say, okay, well, if this is what people are trying to get girls, let's expand the STEM offerings and expand that aisle a little bit. People often ask me, is that bad? Is that good? Should I be buying these pink toys for my girls that have this doll theme? Or should I be trying to counteract that by making sure I'm never getting them any of those tools? And I think, you know, there are pros and cons to both decisions, and that's certainly something we can talk more about during the Q&A if anyone wants to dig into that a little bit deeper. But in my opinion, the most important thing is what the tools do and not what the tools look like, and what kinds of thinking and engagement it offers young children. And if a certain color is going to speak to them, great. You know, maybe make sure if you're using a lot of pink kits, you're also bringing in some things of other colors and other materials. But I think the most important thing is building off of kids' interests. And don't forget that these types of tools and kits and this type of look and these topics should be offered to boys as well, and not just to girls. The most important thing is getting all kids to build off of their interests, regardless of the color and the way it's presented or advertised, and also regardless of the child's gender. But more important than the aesthetic, I think, is what the materials do. So the most important thing we can be doing with girls and kids of any gender is engaging them in creating rather than consuming when it comes to technology and media. So this is kind of my go-to phrase when I'm advising parents or teachers on choosing tech, is that we want kids to be creators rather than consumers of their digital experience. And by that, I mean, if you, instead of just playing an app or a game on your tablet, maybe you will code one or program one using a child-friendly programming app and make your own video game. If you have a child that really likes, you know, watching little videos, then you could have them record and edit them with something like iMovie and create that digital experience rather than just consuming it. We want kids to be engaged in tinkering and exploring. There is research that shows that girls get less experience with tinkering in their early childhood. So things like Legos and blocks and those types of materials, we want to make sure girls and boys are getting equal support and access with that. And then, of course, we know that computer science and engineering, these are the fields where women are most underrepresented at the career level. So these are areas where we want to choose tools and materials to start engaging kids from an early age. There's also some research that, spatial reasoning can be taught. So while there was for a long time this research that boys are better at spatial reasoning, there's now, that's not the belief. The belief is that males may have be culturally indoctrinated to get more experience with tools and tasks that engage their spatial reasoning, but that spatial reasoning can be taught and it can be improved. So things like tangrams, for example, that focus on spatial reasoning, I think those are great tools and manipulatives to offer at an early age. We want kids engaging in building and design and just creating. And of course, like I mentioned, but it's important enough to mention again, building off kids' interests. So here are some suggestions for materials. This particular presentation is not a tutorial on how to use any of these specific technologies, but if you're interested, my next two I Teach 808 sessions, which are going to be in the same Zoom room link, focus on robotics and early childhood robots such as Kibo and Bebot and Codapillar. And then my session after that is on the coding application Scratch Junior. And both of those will be more tech specific. This is more of a high level talk on engaging girls in STEM. But these are just some of my favorite things that you might want to include. I will share with you all a link to my slides, which has a lot of links to resources. And one of them is a folder where I've compiled a ton of different handouts and resources that might be interesting to you. And in there is a PDF to all of the technologies that we have in the early childhood makerspace at Tufts University. So if you're curious to see what another makerspace that's specifically designed for young children has done and what their inventory is, you can definitely check out that folder with those resources after this talk. But you'll see here on this bulleted list a mix of things like robotics kits, building materials like Legos, blocks, clay, all of that, some apps that engage with coding, and also things like STEAM picture books, arts and crafts materials. Those are all great things to be offering and using with your young children every day. So what kinds of activities can we do with these said materials? Well, building and engineering activities are great that you can start from the preschool level. So everything that you see in this resources column of this chart is a link. So like I said, you can have access to my slides after this talk and you will be able to click through any of these tutorials that you might be interested in. And what I find is to sort of differentiate between just free play building and tinkering, which like I mentioned is also important. But if you want to give it more of an engineering focus, to just make sure you're giving some kind of constraint to it. So it might be building your tallest tower using just marshmallows and toothpicks, or the constraint might be a time limit. Build your sturdiest tower, but you only have 3 minutes to do it, go. And so having some sort of constraints, either by materials or time, or a bridge that has to hold a certain amount of weight, having something like that will force kids to go through a problem solving process, and not just the creative creation process, but also this iterative design, problem solving, and debugging process that we want them to be engaging in. One of my favorite ways to integrate STEAM and the arts is through connecting to a storybook. One of my favorite ones to do is The Three Little Pigs. It's like a classic story that most people are familiar with. And from a literature perspective, there's a lot of different versions of this book that you could read and tie into. And what you could do is really make this as short of an activity or as long of a curricular activity as you want. From the reading of the books and discussing them to having kids build their own versions of these Three Little Pigs houses. You can have them use the different materials from the book, such as plastic straws to represent the straws, the straw house, popsicle sticks to represent the stick house, and Legos to represent the brick house, and test them against the breath of the big bad wolf, which I've typically represented through a fan with different settings. Or you can have them build with any materials that they choose. You can connect to blueprints and design and that planning piece that kids sometimes skip at the early childhood level, and we have to nudge them along to practice that planning process as well. So this is a really fun activity that gets into engineering and design, but really it's through this storybook lens. You're not really thinking of it as necessarily an engineering activity so much as an activity that is centered around this story that is engaging for young children. Coding is another great area where we can start providing kids with materials and activities to do, beginning from a preschool, even toddler age, with some unplugged games and activities you can do. There's a lot of great kits and apps that are out there, many of which are completely screen-free, and I will be talking about that in my next session on robotics for young children as well. But one of my favorite games is this Coder Says game. It's a take on the classic Simon Says game, and you are practicing these coding skills of sequencing and cause and effect and listening in sequence and order, but it's all physical and can be done with kids as young as 2 or 3, or it can be done with older kids, and you can be giving them the instructions that are from whatever programming language that you're currently teaching, and you can still have them act out those instructions kind of physically with their body as well. There are robots, and there's all sorts of unplugged board games that you might be familiar with, like the Robot Turtles board game or the Little Coder card game, that are also unplugged ways to get kids using their coding skills. If anyone's interested, Scratch Junior is an app that I really recommend. You can visit scratchjunior.org to find free activity guides, tutorials, and more. This is a free application that you can use with kids around ages 5 to 7, or join me in a couple of hours and I will talk more about this app in detail. These are the board games that I mentioned that are, you know, if any of you joining are parents or family and you're looking for things you can do at home, or your teachers who want to suggest things to families to do at home, a lot of families are already doing a family game night or a board game night. So suggesting integrating these games into what they're doing with their kids is a great suggestion. And I've also used like Robot Turtles, for example, as a center activity with kids, because up to 4 people can play that game. And so after a few times with an adult and really understanding the context of that game, it's something that kids can also learn to play on their own as a center activity. But if all of this was a bit much and a bit overwhelming to you, I think that the easiest way to get started engaging girls and all children in STEM is through books. And that's something that's really approachable that we're already doing with our young kids, hopefully, and presenting them with characters that they can relate to, that are, you know, females that are succeeding and engaging in science and engineering and technology. So these are some of my favorite ones that feature a female protagonist or a male and female protagonist working together. You might have some of your favorite girl-powered STEAM picture books that you can share in the chat as well. And one thing I want to point out is these books are really important. These characters are really important for boys to be seeing as well. So we don't want to just be showing girls these powerful role models of women in STEM and women in technology. And showing them these characters that they can relate to, who are kids, who are girls engaging in these topics. We really want boys and all kids to be seeing this as well, because for real change to happen, we need to get everybody on board, and we need to be breaking these stereotypes, not just for girls, but for boys and everyone else as well. So moving on to a few tips before we lead into the resources and Q&A. A lot of the biggest way that we can impact young children is not with the tools or technologies, the curriculum, or even the books that we choose. It's what we do as the adults, as the parents and educators, what we do and what we say in front of young children. And they're watching and they're listening, and it really does matter, and it makes an impact on them. So we can start by rethinking how we praise projects and how we offer praise. We can try to foster a growth mindset by praising time and effort and not necessarily the final products. So instead of compliments like "you're so smart" or "you're so good at coding," we can offer more nuanced observations about their work. And not only does that help get rid of this idea that some people are just good at coding or good at engineering. It gets rid of that, and it allows people to realize that anyone can be good at these things. It just takes hard work. In addition to that, it really just also shows kids that you're paying attention and you're not giving a cookie cutter compliment to every student in the class, that you really looked at their work and you looked at their process and you're making a meaningful compliment for them. And then our own role modeling is so important. Modeling our own willingness to fail is so important. And if you are a female educator or caregiver, it's even more important. There's even an even heavier weight on our shoulders to be female role models for these young children. As much as we want to show them real world, women in STEM or women in technology, the biggest female role models are the parents and teachers and family members that kids and girls look up to and see every day. So it's really important that we model our own perseverance and our own positive attitudes towards science and engineering. So that means when something goes wrong or we make a mistake, that we frame it in a positive light, and we show that we're happy about this because it's a chance to learn, and it's a chance to ask new questions, make new hypotheses, and make new discoveries. And last but definitely not least, STEM often has this really serious vibe, and it has this, very kind of solo. People think of it as like a solo activity that kids or adults are doing alone, and it's very serious, and there's lots of, numbers, and some of that may be true, but STEM can also be fun and silly and crafty and artsy and beautiful. And presenting this other side of technology and the sciences is really important too, to get more kids interested, and for us as the educators and the parents, for us to be interested in having fun and being silly with it too. If anyone, after watching this presentation, thinks that maybe they want more information or more practice in a virtual setting, I definitely recommend you check out the Tufts Early Childhood Technology Graduate Certificate Program. This is a blended learning program, but currently during COVID, it's completely virtual. Usually it's a year of virtual training and then a 1-week in-person component in Boston during the summer, but it's currently all virtual. If you have any questions about this program, I helped launch, and I was the associate director of this program for 3 years. And now I live in Hawaii, like all of you. I live in beautiful Oahu, but I remain connected as a lecturer for this program. And we go through all sorts of things in this program, from tech tools for playful learning with young children, maker spaces, museums, designing curriculum, and more. And it's really exciting because it's always a worldwide cohort, because it is either all virtual due to the pandemic, or it's 90% virtual. So we get to hear kind of global perspectives. It's a wonderful learning community that you might be interested in. Here are some other resources. So as I mentioned, I created a folder for you that has these slides, and it has handouts and resources that might be interesting to you. And it's just bit.ly/Sullivan Resources. You can visit my website if you want to get a little bit more information or research empirical articles on girls in STEM. The DevTech Research Group website, that was the group where I conducted all of the research that I shared on girls in STEM. And also feel free to connect with me on social media, on Twitter, and then on Instagram. If any of you joining are parents, that's where I have been sharing my journey as a parent and how I do STEM and science with toddler and preschool age range in an informal home setting. So yes, here's my email if anyone wants to stay connected after this presentation or has any questions that they want to ask via email, or even wants to collaborate or brainstorm together. I'm always really interested in that. I'm going to stop talking in just a minute so we can do Q&A if you have any questions, but I do just want to show, hopefully you can still see this. I left my slides to show you the folder. I have my slides for all three of the I Teach 808 presentations that I'm doing today, as well as just other handouts and resources that might be useful to you in your teaching practice or your work in other settings. So I'm going to take a deep breath. I think we have around 9 or 10 minutes that we can do Q&A. So I will stop sharing my screen now so I can look at all of you, some of you who have video on, or go into the chat window or turn it over maybe to Caitlin if she was keeping track of some questions along the way. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward now to chatting and getting to some questions.
Amanda, that was so inspiring. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge. And I do want to welcome folks to go ahead and put your questions or your comments into the chat, and I can facilitate sharing of those questions and comments. Shauna Lay said, thank you, and she is looking forward to your other sessions. David said, mahalo. And then if participants noticed, Amanda just dropped in the link to her resource folder in there. So I'm just going to pause here and invite you all to go ahead and type your questions into the chat.
Yeah, aloha, Amanda. Sorry I came late. I was in another session, but I think this is more relevant. I teach middle school science. And I know any kind of projects that you've heard lately that are virtual, that have been engaging and really have hit home, not only with females, but also with both genders.
Yeah, virtual has put a wrench in a lot of things, especially since a lot of what we try to do is really hands-on stuff, and that's really difficult. But something that I've seen people doing is really, everyone is more isolated than usual, and we are more at home and stuck without connection. So kind of playing on that, creating at the middle school level, maybe using Scratch or a different programming language to create programs or animations about our quarantine routine. What's our day like now? It's very different maybe than what it was a year ago. Creating virtual greeting cards. This is something I've seen people do that I think, because we can't see all of our grandparents or our family, technology is great for that. And how can we play on that a little bit more? So like Valentine's Day is coming up, so virtual Valentines, things that could either be programmed if you wanted to introduce coding, or you could do something with like movie editing software and sending like a little short Valentine's greeting card, get well soon card. People have been doing projects, virtual projects, thanking like doctors and other scientists and people who are working on the vaccine. So I think sometimes, like right now, it's really, we feel a struggle because we can't do the curriculum that we normally would want to do, but playing into what is actually happening and what is on kids' minds, and kind of coming up with topics around that can be useful and can hit home.
So we do have a few questions in the chat. Adriana Molina was asking, with class time being cut in half or in half day, we're trying to do more with less, and she's wondering, how do we encourage exploration in the classroom with COVID and no sharing tools? So we have a time constraint. We also have constraints on our, the use of our physical materials. So she's wondering if you could speak to that.
Yes, it's such a challenge right now, and I don't know that I know all the answers to what we can do right now during COVID, but I can say that even with time being cut, it is important to still foster exploration, even if what you're doing is sending home prompts of what kids can do at home. And I'm not talking about things that would require expensive materials or technology, but sending home, little prompts of what kids can do with found materials or natural materials. things like that. With no sharing tools, then I think sometimes are you, if you have tablets or iPads that kids are allowed to use without sharing, but that you can sanitize, I think apps like Scratch Junior are great at the early childhood level, but also some of those unplugged games that I talked about, if there's no sharing tools, things like Coder Says, or things like Program Your Teacher. That's where the kids can program you to like navigate around the room. Sometimes they'll get a little funny with it and try to get you to do different things. So I think maybe leaning into more unplugged and just things that you do physically with your body can be more useful. Some of those storybooks that I mentioned, just with no sharing tools, it really is a big challenge.
And then Jay Black asked, do you have any suggestions for upper elementary teachers to foster this mindset for girls that have already begun to have these stereotypes and integrate them into their own, consciousness? How can we work to change these stereotypes before it gets too deeply instilled in their minds? Are there specific elementary books you would suggest or coding programs as supplementary resources?
That's a great question. And that was something we were kind of struggling with this VEX research that I was mentioning we were doing with middle and high school girls. But at the elementary level, I think the most important thing is not to brush the stereotypes under the rug. It is to call them out and talk about them and address them in your classroom. So if you hear someone say something, or even if it's just, if you're talking about something and you want to just bring up this idea of stereotypes, and there are some resources online that have to do with how do we talk about stereotypes with young kids. So with early childhood, it's about kind of preventing them and having these playful experiences. But around fourth grade, it might be actually, let's talk about what are stereotypes? What stereotypes do we have? Let's dig in and demystify them a little bit. And you can research, you can email me and I can send you some prompts. I don't have the links offhand, but you can find talking points that you can actually talk to these kids about. And at the fourth grade level, we can actually dig in and talk about that. Programs and materials to use. I think Scratch is a great one for elementary age. It's a free platform. Lego We Do is one of my favorite robotics kits for elementary school, starting at around third grade. Lego We Do 2.0 is really fun. Especially because there is this idea that boys like Legos more, this cultural idea that boys like Legos more than girls, getting girls confident with their Legos and coding and robotics. And if you can do any kind of mentorship, this is something that I've been trying to see. If you can get girls from like a high school level who are doing something with science, or that they want to come in and teach these fourth grade girls or these elementary girls some sort of project, I think that role modeling sometimes is more powerful than a grown-up, is seeing kids like slightly older who are rocking it. If you can come up with something where even sixth graders, if that's easier than bringing in high schoolers, come in and do something, I think that can be really powerful as well.
That's a great idea. I just wrote that down to remind myself for the future. So we are almost out of time here. We have one more minute left. So I do want to say mahalo to Dr. Amanda Sullivan and for everybody's participation. And we hope you'll find this session helpful and make some valuable connections to your own work. Please help us to complete the evaluation form, and I'm going to put that in the chat in just 1 minute. And you will be entered to win one of 20 gift cards, $5 Starbucks gift cards once you complete that session evaluation. And of course, that will also go to Amanda, and that will be helpful for her as well. So thank you to everybody for being here today. Please feel free to join the other sessions coming up, and have a really wonderful day today.
Hello.